From birth, we were conditioned to think of ourselves as very small. When I say we Filipinos, when we're actually a big country, huge resources, but we always put ourselves down. And I feel that AI can be a tool to level the playing field. And as it turned out, the surveys that followed shortly after showed Filipinos as number one in terms of search interest in AI, or number four, I think, in usage in terms of web traffic. And then Microsoft recently released statistics that 86% daw no, of our knowledge workers, that's nearly 9 out of 10, are using some form of AI. And we are leading the world average. This is despite, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of investment.
Fractional is for world-class consultants in AI, software engineering, product, and design. Dominic Ligot is a data analyst, researcher, software developer, entrepreneur, and technologist. He's the founder of CirroLytics, a social impact AI company, and DataEthicsPH, an online community focused on social issues such as data privacy, data security, AI-driven discrimination, and more. He represents the Philippines as member of the expert advisory panel of the International Scientific Report on Advanced AI Safety, convened by the UK Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. He led the development of the nationwide data science education program, Project SPARTA. He also co-founded the Analytics and AI Association of the Philippines. Dominic is a 3-time global winner of the NASA and ESA International Space Apps Challenges. In this episode, we talk about how GenAI is being adopted in the Philippines, using AI in the humanitarian sector, go-to-market strategies for AI consultants, and AI safety. This is your host and co-founder from Swarm, Alexis Collado. Thanks for listening.
Hey Doc, welcome to Fractional.
Thanks, Alexis. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
So what's the etymology behind your name?
Oh, yeah. So people think I'm a doctor half of the time.
You aren't a doctor?
No, I'm not. I teach doctors from time to time. But actually, that started back in grade school. You know how, at a certain age, all of your baby teeth come falling out and your real teeth come in. So I really had these huge, big, new teeth. So I looked like Bugs Bunny.
So it's a Bugs Bunny reference.
Yeah. So people were like kidding me, "What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc?" Until I just decided to call myself Doc Ligot.
Okay, so Doc Ligot, what are you up to now?
Well, many things. The most recent, I think many people associate me with generative AI, giving all of these talks. Actually, that's just the latest in a long string of, I would say, pivots that we've had over the years.
What kinds of pivots were they? Like what kind of roles did you assume?
Well, I started actually and I don't mention this too much anymore, but I actually started in banking. So I was in financial services for more than a decade. Actually, I was there for 14 years. Did pretty much every role in the bank, primarily consumer banking. That's how I learned on the job all of this fancy stuff that we now call data science and analytics. So I learned that from trading, credit scoring, Excel. Obviously, is the killer app in banking. And then little by little, as the practice evolved, I got exposed to programming via SAS, SQL, and then later I don't know if people remember Perl. I used to do Perl, Perl, PHP, and then later Python, and then R. So I can probably say I'm a self-taught programmer in that sense. Never had any formal training. As far as I can remember. So anyway, I was talking about pivots. So I started in banking, and then moved into IT. So I worked in an IT company for several years during the transition period when the word data science started to become popular. This was circa 2012 to 2014. And then spent several years in that job, traveled a lot, met, and that's how I got aware of, in other words, technology adoption, because we were marketing data warehouses and analytics. And that's when I made a decision. I remember this was circa Halloween of 2016. I was based in San Francisco, and I tell this anecdote a lot. I was riding an Uber in the middle of traffic, and the Uber app. If you remember the Uber app, it had a feature that where you can play games. So playing games, and then there was a certain type of game that Uber was running, like math and programming puzzles. So I was just solving them in the middle of San Francisco traffic. And then I think I got about 4 answers. I don't know if I got them all right or wrong. Then the app said, "Hey, look, you seem to know a little bit about technology. Would you like to apply for a job at Uber?" And that like blew my mind. So I go, wow.
It was a recruiting
It was a recruitment tool. And that's what inspired me now. Okay, I'm living here, stone's throw from all the tech people, Silicon Valley, etc. What's happening back home? Barely anything has changed. So that's when I made the decision. I'm going to go back home. I quit that job early 2017. But late 2016, I was already laying the groundwork for what would eventually become Cirrolytics.
And Cirrolytics, what is it?
Yeah, so the etymology is cirrus clouds and analytics. And if you remember, cloud adoption only started becoming mainstream probably going towards 2020. Like before 2020, everyone was happy having on-prem or installing everything on your laptop. And with the heyday of, at that time, AWS, and shortly after Azure, we wanted to advocate cloud-based analytics, kaya Cirrolytics. And we started out where many people start out in the consulting space. So we were doing jobs for small, medium companies, and then eventually large corporates. And then we really hit our stride when we started pairing training and consulting. So I'm sure a lot of people do this. Training becomes a funnel. We were conducting classes in analytics, no? Called it analytics master classes. And this predated kind of the AIM and the UP and the UANP with their bachelor's and master's degrees. No? In fact, I think that may have been part of the inception because there was huge demand for these analytics courses. So we would run classes of maybe 20 to 30 people at a time, teach them. Most of it was actually just Excel-based stuff. The idea was to get them interested in something more advanced. So I would say we had about maybe 10 to 20% conversion. No? So out of a class of 20, we'll get 2 to 3 leads. And then they would say, "Hey, look, this is all nice, but this is too hard for us to do. Would you be interested in, helping us with our whatever data architecture or do some dashboards for them?" So that was a good entry point. No? We did that several times. That whole end-to-end cycle was maybe go to 3 months from you conduct the training to you close a deal. Then repeat. And then towards 2019, so by that time, we'd been doing it for 3 years almost. Believe it or not, we started to get bored. Like, is this it? Is this why we set up a company?
Yeah.
So we started experimenting. And one of the experiments we did was what people now know as hackathons, joining them. We started joining some hackathons. I remember we joined 2. One was the Break the Fake Challenge, and the other was the NASA Space Apps Challenge. This was late 2019. And we didn't expect to win, but we won both. And we felt that, hey, look, this, and in both cases, Break the Fake was about fake news, no? NASA was about, hey, we've got tons of this big data, satellite stuff. Can you use it for sustainable development? We know nothing about sustainable development. But at that time, there was this ongoing, hindi pa COVID, no? It was a dengue epidemic. We said, maybe we can use satellite data to solve for dengue, no? So that was just a concept. And then when we started digging into it, a lot of the stuff that we used to do for corporates, marketing analytics, finance analytics, if you tweak the framework, you can apply it also with non-financial data, non-marketing data. So the dengue one, just to explain it, the short version is, you have these dengue data coming from DOH, but it's about 1 to 2 months late. Pretty useless, for actionable anything. But then we found research that Google had done something similar with flu. They correlated searches for flu with actual flu cases, and the correlation is very close. We said, maybe it works for dengue. At the same time, we also got weather data from Pag-asa, which this is going to be a legend. We had to buy from them. So we said, okay, can we buy some weather data from Pag-asa? So they sold it to us. And so never mind that. I have the receipt framed somewhere. No? So when we bought that, we had, I think we had precipitation, humidity, temperature. And then we had the Google searches for dengue, and then other related searches like fever or paracetamol. Basta we compiled a lot of data. And then we got a fairly decent model. No, I think at that time, the R squared was about 85%. Not bad.
It's like a level of accuracy.
Yes. In other words, you don't have to have it exactly, but the direction was very accurate. So when the indicator ticked up, dengue was gonna go up. And then NASA naman. So what can we do with satellite data? And then after a little research, we found some literature that described the ideal conditions for mosquito habitats, certain level of humidity and temperature on the ground. So we thought, baka that's an app where we use the weather and searches to predict when dengue would spike, and it's actually broken down by region pa, no? So the weather in every region. And the funny part about dengue was it's almost very predictable by time, but it's not predictable by place. So maybe 1 year it's gonna start spiking in Luzon. The following year it's gonna spike in Mindanao, but roughly the same time. So I don't know what these mosquitoes are doing, no? And then once we get a signal, we can use the satellite data to zoom in on that area and be able to tell people, hey, look, these are the likely areas where you have mosquito habitats in your city. End to end, diba? You have the when, the how, the where. Put that together, and we submitted it. We even created a prototype during the hackathon. The hackathon was for 48 hours lang. And we didn't expect to win, so we won.
That's an extremely elaborate,
diba?
Like
prototype
that actually solves a problem.
But it's I think the beauty of consulting is you get to transfer. Kasi we experienced that also in the during our corporate consulting. What we learned in banking is transferable to retail. It's transferable to telco. Parang ganun. So we said maybe it's transferable to this. That's what got us the inspiration. So here's a series of fortunate events or unfortunate events. So we said, hey, we won. We were announced as the global winner. This was around February 2020. In March, lockdown, COVID, and we said, "Oh no, this is it. We're screwed." But then what we didn't expect was obviously NASA challenge. That's global PR. The publicity got us into the radar of the UN, of the USAID, and at that time everyone was worried about COVID. And I said, would you be willing to help out with the COVID response? Everything from detection to vaccines. And it's all data, if you think about it. Yeah, okay. As long as there's data. Yes, there's a lot of data, but no one available to crunch it.
So what happened was you got bored as a consultancy. You found a model that works for you already.
Yes.
And then you wanted to try and build something like a very scrappy, like a
product,
startup founder,
something, yeah.
Right? You joined these two hackathons, you won, and then the pandemic happened.
But
because of the buzz,
completely unintentional, the buzz brought the work to us. And I kid you not, the years of 2020, 2021, and 2022, if I recall, were very good years for us as a consultancy. We booked a lot of deals.
You booked like the World Health Organization,
WHO, UNICEF, UNDP. And then just to give
all the international,
all the big blue icons. And here, just to give people an idea, no? At the scale, relative scale we were operating. When UNICEF came knocking, they had this thing called the UNICEF Innovation Fund. And they were funding early stage, as long as your product is proven, anything that can solve whatever.
The SDGs.
Yeah. And then on the local front, UNICEF also had a call for solutions. So we applied to both, it doesn't hurt. and we got both, both, and each one was 100K US. So it's 200K, and
that's really a smart way of doing it, actually.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't think it was because we were super special, to be honest. I think it's because they were looking for an interesting combination of people who have a solution, and there's a lot of those, but people who have proven it in some domains. We said dengue, it works. And we've already done some work for the other UN agencies.
It's very humanitarian.
Yeah, very humanitarian.
Social impact.
No, I mean, just to segue into that, the big change really was, if you're dealing with corporates as a consultancy, ultimately it's an ROI question. What's the return? And then now there is no financial metric. It's all about how many cases of dengue or COVID. So it really forces you to think and dig deep about what is impact. What does impact mean? How many people did you help? And that, I think that was very helpful. And that powered us through 3 years of probably the most productive so far stuff that we did. But this thing has a weird ending. Kasi, so the original project, Aedes, never got, it got funded, lots of PR, but it never got adopted. We were talking to the likes of DOH and all these other, I think the closest we got to a potential adoption was a pharma company. And then in all conversations we had, and this is interesting learning for consultants and founders, that there were two roadblocks. Number one, second is the most tragic. Number one was, okay, you got all these awards, but we're not necessarily sure we want to be predictive about health. In other words, they're willing to wait for people to get sick and die first. I mean, practically.
So they can't get the revenue otherwise, right?
Exactly. That's a good point. Hospitals thrive on sick people. And the second, the most tragic one. Although I'm called doc, I'm not a medical doctor. And that was always a roadblock. Do you have a background in medicine? No, but we use satellite data to predict dengue. I mean, and they'll say, sorry, we would rather deal with people with a background in medicine. And I think that's always a roadblock anywhere you go, where it's either a case of gatekeeping or tradition, even if you have a winning product. I guess the positive side of that was the core tech that we developed, which is basically data visualization, data management, and models. We were able to bring it to other domains. No? We brought it to COVID. We brought it to food security. So there was this project about tracking supply chains of food that were getting disrupted during COVID. That's a data question. The most compelling one was human rights. I did work in human rights. What did we do? We measured the impact of, you remember how we had this ECQ, MCQ, MECQ. So these represented varying levels of, I would say, public health alarm. No? So if it's ECQ talaga, it's a lockdown. So we had dates. So again, following the same logic as the dengue, we said, what if we can measure the impact of these dates on how people search for certain things like LGBT or food? So we compiled this long list of words matched to the SDGs. And what we found was, in many cases, every time there's a public health emergency, people stop caring about all these other things, which was an interesting insight. Like things like privacy. If people are getting sick, who cares about privacy? You have to put all your details into these contact tracing apps, and good luck if they get leaked. Which was a great insight I remember we were doing that project for the likes of CHR, Commission on Human Rights. It just shows you that if you saw human rights as a product, it kind of moves up and down like the stock market. The popularity of human rights rises and falls based on other concerns. No? So imagine how abstract that thing is. We wrote that paper, sent it to them. I don't know how well they used it. But I think the most compelling one, and this is documented, was when we helped the DOH through UNDP make vaccines more popular. Because as you remember, people were afraid of vaccines.
Like anti-vaxxers.
Yes. Well, actually now, it's starting to get proven that there was actually an anti-vax campaign pala against Sinovac. Did you see that? By the CIA, whatever, right? We didn't know that then. And then,
okay.
So what we were looking at, the vaccine acceptance, which is the number of people who were willing to get vaccinated, based on a survey run by Facebook, was only like 10%, 15%. Everyone was scared. So
how did you tackle the problem? Like what was on your mind when you were presented with that?
It was educational for us because we were forced to dig into communications theory, behavioral science. And what we found was there's this interesting framework called diffusion of innovation. Actually,
diffusion of innovation.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, anytime you have something new, it actually is used a lot in tech. There's always 5 types of people. There's the original innovators. Syempre, they'll use it.
Early adopters.
Yeah, and then the early adopters. Yeah. Those two get along very well. And they represent maybe no more than 10 to 15%. But then if you get to early majority, which is the mass adoption, there's this thing called a chasm, meaning the motivations of the early adopters and the innovators are often different from the early majority. So we use that framework, getting all the data from Pulse Asia, from SWS, from the Facebook survey, and we were able to map out which parts of the Philippines correlated with these 5 segments, and what were their reasons. So I'll give you an example. No, the early adopters know that they have to get vaccinated. No questions
Like
asked.
people in Metro Manila.
Mostly Metro Manila.
Okay.
But then when you get to early majority, they're willing to get vaccinated, but they're worried about side effects. Or there might not even be supply of vaccine available. So that's what's affecting their kind of their intention.
Your mental model.
Correct. And then the late majority and the laggards, they don't trust the government. Or they believe that COVID isn't even a disease or it's a conspiracy. So the insight we gave to DOH was you have to change your marketing strategy. You can't have a one-size-fits-all message, which is very scientific. If you remember yung mga ads ng DOH nun, it's all about efficacy, these scientific medical terms.
No one cares about that.
No one understands. Remember, this is the first pandemic we had in the era of social media. During SARS, wala pang Facebook. We said, why don't we tackle each segment, depending on the location, prioritize certain messages, and most importantly, this is a Facebook ads masterclass nga eh. The creatives you're using. Like see DOH, they were using charts and numbers, which is great if you're a doctor. Pero no one
doesn't
that
evoke
stuff.
an emotional response.
Yes, correct.
From the video.
While the enemy, the anti-vaxxers were showing people sick on a bed, with rashes, mga ganyan, very personable. No? So I said, why don't
it's
you
more relatable.
follow the bad guys. Show people not dying or show old people really lining up to get vaccinated. So for me, I think that's still a career. I think a career peak for us because we went from a 15% acceptance rate in I think circa May 2022. By the end of the year, so it was like 7 months, we were at 80 to 90%.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, well, we're not taking credit for, of course, you had to supply the vaccines.
But still, it's data-driven marketing, right? So,
pretty much marketing.
Yeah.
That's the other interesting thing about consulting in the nonprofit sector. They don't call it marketing. It sounds very capitalist. But when you say behavioral change, sounds very creepy, but that's marketing for them. Or adopting a new thing.
No, the marketing you do is in order to
trigger the behavioral change. Yeah, so that was a massive pivot. And then, so that brings us to 2022. We were feeling that the contracts were not getting renewed anymore. So revenue started to dip. And then I was one of the early, I was one of the early testers of a relatively unknown company called OpenAI at that time. No, August 2022, they had a call out.
Now the fastest growing company on the planet.
We have a research release. If you want to sign up as a researcher, we'll give you early access to this thing called ChatGPT. No one knew about it. No one cared. And I said, okay, since just like once upon a time, we joined the hackathon to see what's out there. Maybe I'll join this and figure it out. And I was completely blown away. I mean, as a data guy, I've been exposed to NLP, mga language models before. They were all very clunky. But I saw this, wow, this is like talking to a human. And there's so many applications.
Class user experience.
Correct.
For anyone.
And then when I heard that they were going to give it for free, as in the free tier, open, that's, I think, when it all changed. So as early as August, I was already predicting this is going to be big. We need to pivot into this. So when the public release came out in November, I think, as expected, adoption worldwide grew. But in the Philippines, I was really surprised. It was relatively chill. no one was talking about it. Yeah, maybe the techies, the devs,
early adopters for sure.
Power diffusion ulit, diba? So when my birthday came, my birth month is March. I made a decision. If I hit the birthday and no one else is talking publicly about this, I'm gonna start talking about it. So starting March, I reactivated my Facebook. I was out of it for 12 years. I opened an Instagram, a TikTok. I reformatted my LinkedIn and my Twitter. And I opened the YouTube channel. And started recording videos. And I said, I'll just be the noisiest guy about AI. Who cares if people hate it or not? Actually, the reception was pretty positive. And then...
we wouldn't have met.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Even Dexter, So, I think it was July, roughly a year ago, I got invited to Cebu to talk to the contact center industry, BPOs. And I said, I'm not going to give this usual techie talk about AI. I'm going to talk about how people use it, talk about the fears. And I think one of the parting messages I showed them, I still have that deck. I think it's still legendary. Was I showed them, are you familiar with the Mercator distortion projection on a
No.
map? So the world map, as we know, it's kind of a flat map, right? So that's where the flat,
Yeah. The perspectives are
yeah,
distorted.
because it was a globe and they
Mm.
flattened it. So the poles look bigger and the equator looks smaller.
Mm.
So, and there's this tool called I forgot the name, the True Size, where you can move countries around, the globe to see how they would really look like or put them side by side. And so I just showed a slide like that. Like, do you know that Mindanao is as big as Turkey? So Turkey is only 1/3 of us. Or Luzon is even bigger than South Korea or Ireland. Or Singapore and Hong Kong are roughly the size of Metro Manila. And we hold these countries in such high regard. And I remember perfect timing. That was when our women's rugby team, I think, beat New Zealand or something. And I said, from birth we were conditioned to think of ourselves as very small. When I say we Filipinos, when we're actually a big country, huge resources, but we always put ourselves down. And I feel that AI can be a tool to level the playing field. And as it turned out, the surveys that followed shortly after showed Filipinos as number one in terms of search interest in AI, or number four, I think, in usage in terms of web traffic. And then Microsoft recently released statistics that 86% of our knowledge workers, that's nearly 9 out of 10, are using some form of AI. And we are leading the world average. This is despite, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of investment.
Why do you think that is?
I feel that the B2B adoption has too many obstacles to surmount, like privacy, security, and maybe they're still conflating like old AI and generative AI. While individuals, freelancers, consultants, we just use it because we need it, right? Use it for productivity, use it to code.
There's so many co-pilots,
Correct.
content generation, and different pieces.
So we have this weird two-tier adoption. On an individual level, it's probably high and rising. On institutional level, too many layers. And that's an interesting puzzle to figure out. I didn't know that about a year ago. Now,
a lot of enterprises now, I think, for corporate innovators, that's going to be the next playing field. Right?
Absolutely.
Whoever is the head of IT or head of innovation, your head will be on a plate
if you don't
get
adopt
AI right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's be clear. There's certainly a lot of hype, and I don't know if I'll get any critics for this, but I think one of the problems that AI has now, GenAI lalo, is it's coming recently on the heels of another tech trend that kind of blew out, which is blockchain, Web3, NFT. There's a lot of broken hearts there, a lot of money stuck there, and I feel that's what's driving the hesitation. That, oh no, this could be another Web3 or this could be another NFT trend, and people are hesitant to throw money at it. While on the flip side, there's a lot of B2C adoption, retail adoption, and ironically, the infrastructure you need to train AI is the same infrastructure you use to do blockchain mining. It's the GPUs, no? So I'm really puzzled why it's not translating 100%. Maybe it's something that we figure out over the next few months. But anyway, that's end to end, kind of the ups and downs. Started out as consultancy, then went to training, went to humanitarian, and then now in Gen AI, where what I'm doing now is obviously a lot of evangelism, a lot of thought leadership, also training, but I'm doing that on a personal basis. And I'm sure it's going to head back to consulting soon enough, but I'm not forcing it until the market starts demanding it. There's a little bit of demand already out there, but it's very cautious.
I think for a lot of content creators like us, right? Typically the focus is on the intro stuff, right? So how do you do prompt engineering? How do you give more context? Give us your assumptions to the LLM so that it can do better content generation. Like how do you feel we can advance as a community so that we can be more of the builders utilizing the technology, right? Building more of the rags or like AI startups.
Well, for me, I think the obvious thing staring us in the face is this is probably the true real third wave for web. Kasi Web 3 kind of fell flat because it was too conflated with,
Scams,
blockchain and scams,
ICOs.
no? And it's expensive. You need gas fees to run any Ethereum, network, right? But here, think about it. Any website can be a chatbot. I mean, why do you go to a website? You need
It's
information, you
yeah.
need to transact. All of those tasks can easily fall into a chat interface.
Yeah.
And it can adapt. So I think that's the hidden potential. How are we able to translate what we previously was using like SaaS or Web 2 for, and then translate that to, and I'm not saying chatbots are be all and end all. No, I think chatbots is just the easy,
It's just the entry point.
interface. And I think many of the potential Gen AI use cases that will probably mature are use cases that don't even need a chatbot. In other words, you're using the LLM as part of a middleware, and it's doing orchestration. That's why the latest trend is agents, diba? Agentic
Agents, co-pilots,
correct.
AI tools.
So I think there's two parts to it, and this is still evolving. One part that people kind of find intuitive is you have a human, and then an AI will either assist you or be a co-pilot to you. But then I think there's a whole slew of other tasks where humans don't even need to be involved. It's like AI talking to AI. So what I mean, to put it in simple terms, what you would use
An AI
decision tree
employee
for,
or
yeah,
something.
exactly. What you would use a for loop and an if statement for, you can just give to an LLM with very very kind of open and loose criteria, and it'll know how to figure it out. Like one exercise that I love doing in my prompt engineering class is you can literally prompt the LLM to create a program. No, I mean not just write code. Like pretend you are customer service front end. Here are the menu options. Ask the user what option they want, and at any time the user provides the word menu, you go back to the main menu. It's as simple as that. And then the LLM just imagines what the interactions are. Of course, people might be scared to roll that out because you never know where the conversation might lead. But it's surprisingly robust. I've used it to create a career coach. I've used it to create an ideation program and a design thinking program. And sometimes that's all people need. You just need someone to bounce ideas with, and the LLM comes up with some weird response that triggers another idea, and then you already have it. So I feel that area is still largely unexplored.
Yeah.
And it's a totally new way of dealing with technology.
To me, what's interesting about GenAI is that you don't know the infinity of
Correct.
possibilities.
Good and
yet,
bad.
right?
There's good stuff and bad stuff
Oh,
also.
we should talk about that next. So you've been a very vocal advocate of AI ethics, clamoring for safety, transparency.
Yep.
You're building the institutions that possibly police people for misusing AI.
Yeah.
What are your top of mind things related to AI safety these days?
I'll give you first a little history on that. So AAP, which I helped found, got started in
Analytics
2018.
Association.
The analytics, and now the Analytics and AI Association.
Okay.
So this was circa 2019 again, just as we were doing these hackathons. I was proposing to AAP to do we should have like an ethics committee. Because in any association, you have committees. And this was the time when deepfakes was starting to become popular, and people were worried about. And this is the inside juice on that. The reception on the idea of an ethics committee wasn't, it didn't resonate with the association. It wasn't something people wanted to talk about, or maybe it ranked very low on priority. And I was saying, no, we have to be vocal because we're the authority, blah blah blah. And there was no response. So several months passed, and I said, look, if we're not gonna do a committee, I hope you don't mind if I do my own. So that's when I started a group called DataEthicsPH. We weren't even talking about AI pa. No? Like literally, data ethics is data privacy being compromised, security, data quality, and then the more lurid stuff like disinformation, discrimination, all the way up to problems with automation, which actually in a way was a harbinger for what's to come, because now that we have LLMs, you have all of this jailbreaks and fake news. And that community grew much faster. You know, there were at a time we hit 20,000 followers, way ahead of the likes of AEP, Data Science Philippines, so fast. And I was pleasantly just surprised that people wanted to talk about it. So there's
A lot of people are scared.
apart from scared, looking for guidance. And I wouldn't presume to have all of the answers, but at least we had a venue to talk about, you know, proper use of data. And remember, this was the pandemic ulit, no? Lockdowns. That's when we started doing these podcasts and webinars. We would hold a 1 hour Zoom call, and these would be fully booked, 150 to 300 people every time. And first, it was triggered by the misuse of COVID statistics. Remember, everyone was posting their forecasts, no rhyme or reason sometimes, just to raise the alarm bell. And I said, that's also bad, because forecasts by nature are wrong. You know, it's a guess. And then it moved on to other issues like, you know, discrimination, data quality. And then when the LLMs came up, we said, hey, look, we have something new to look at, because the fact that these new types of AI are general purpose. That's actually what differentiates the old AI from the new AI. The old AI, like Waze, there's only so many ways. Yeah, it's only so many ways you can use Waze. You can't use Waze to spread disinformation, or you have to try very hard. But in an LLM or these image tools, anything goes. Prompt it, it'll do it. And then now they're adding like guardrails. They're not working, so you can jailbreak them. So I feel that this is the time when policy now has to take over, because there's only so much you can do with the tool. The tool is just meant to do what you tell it. The only real solution to that is you should restrict what people can type into the prompt, which defeats the purpose of having a chatbot, right? And I think that's where we need to catch up. You know, so to your point, the accuracy of the output,
and if it's biased,
the fairness, the bias, the transparency. And then I think the most important principle is, this is what gets into the sci-fi realm. Because of how these models work, you can literally let them prompt each other. That's the agentic model already. We should still have the ability to shut them off. Because if you have AI talking to AI, there's no predicting where that conversation will go. It might eventually come to a point where, you know, they might start plotting something that might be harmful to us. Maybe not maliciously, maybe accidentally. And there has to be a way of auditing that, picking that up and shutting it down. And one of
agency over the agents.
Correct. Yeah, and then it'll get to weird terrain, like do these AI, let's say they become self-initiating, do they deserve rights also? Should they be compensated? Because now they're going to technically steal tasks from humans, and that's another issue also. The job loss, the job displacement question. And then finally, we go back to something that's haunted even blockchain, the sheer amount of power, diba? And carbon that this stuff generates. Not so much the usage, no? People, I think, mistake the whole problem. I don't know if you read that article about every query in ChatGPT costs one bottle of water or something. That's actually technically wrong, because that consumption was during training. So they really burned that carbon when they trained the model. And it's now being amortized. I mean, from an accounting standpoint, you're amortizing it over the query. So in theory, the more you use the models, the cheaper it gets. But if you're not using them enough, sayang yung resources that you burned to train them. But obviously, having operated in the humanitarian sector, you'll use any soundbite you want, no, to lobby for more efficient and carbon neutral or green technology. And I think eventually that's where it's going to run aground. Kasi we don't have unlimited resources. And even now, the power balance is parang slanted towards the big tech companies, California, while the rest of us just consume na lang, no, their output. I think that needs to change eventually. So that's the AI ethics stuff. I'm pretty passionate about it.
It starts with energy. That's the first touch point.
Energy and labor. I think if you're gonna choose two things to address, it's and those are both economic questions, diba? Lalo na for, you know, emerging market. Palagi na lang tayong emerging on that front, diba? In between, I think there's also a lack of, I would say, it's not consensus parang more of informed debates. Kasi for example, give you an example. So, I got nominated to represent the Philippines in the international panel on AI safety. It's a voluntary role. No? I get to, it's like the UN but for AI safety. In fact, we have a meeting coming up, and the idea was to poll ideas from all over the world about how safe these models are. Now, as a result, I'm now getting invited to attend these mga congressional committees kasi there are some AI bills na in Congress. And I'll give you the picture.
Like House of the Representatives.
Yeah. So these committee meetings, they're televised. No, they can go in any direction. The last one I was on, we literally burned 1.5 out of the 3 hours. The haba ng meeting on just defining what AI is or what AI should be as the scope of the bill. And for me, that could have been easily done before the meeting. Para now we're talking, okay, we're just going to talk about this particular AI and this is what we need to address. Kasi, for example, the international panel, they decided to ignore all the other types of AI but focus on generative AI only because that's the one causing a lot of disruptions. I think that was a smart move. I'm not saying you can't misuse other AI, pero
it constrains the conversation. Correct. So that
being practical,
it's more productive.
Yeah, and we know this from anyone who's been in startups, builds. Your scope creep is the enemy. If this thing keeps getting bigger and bigger, you're never finished. So that's the state of affairs as far as AI is concerned. AI safety is concerned.
We have a long way to go, I think.
we're barely at ground zero,
If people are starting up their own consultancies these days, how do they avoid being relegated to like a guru?
Pros and cons.
How do they become actually capable in AI?
I think pros and cons. Like in my case, I was doing the actual work long before I became a consultant. So I was kind of a late bloomer. I was already in my late 30s when I started CirroLytics, turning 40 na nga. So maybe that puts me behind in terms of, kasi the trend in many companies, you want to start and grow as fast as possible. I literally had to burn the first 3 decades of my life just doing stuff. But then it quickly caught up because all of this accumulated experience and use cases was conveniently at my disposal. So when I meet clients, I don't necessarily come across as a salesman. Kasi that's often a problem when you're a consultant trying to pitch. I just ask them, okay, what's your problem? This is what we did in this sector, that sector, and they sign you up. So I feel that the two extremes you want to avoid is, number one, if you're purely sales driven, not too much delivery, your credibility will suffer. And then there's another one where you just become practically a BPO. No, you're just hired manpower to do tasks by companies. I mean, that's a legitimate business model too, but that's not for many, or at least in my book, that would not be a productive use of a consultant. A consultant is kind of in the middle where you're either there to do like a strategy
and execution,
or a prototype or a transition or trigger some sort of a transformation. That's a good sweet spot. And then later, if it matures, then you either pass it on to a partner, or if you have that kind of that other side of your business that does staff augmentation, then that's a regular stream. So what did I do? I did what many consultants do. You accumulate as many use cases as you can, and then eventually, like going through that NASA hackathon experience, the templates were there already. You just need to tweak it. And sometimes
it's like a cookbook.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and then now with the generative AI, you practically have the ability to to spice up a template or create other templates based on that. I think that's still an unexplored territory.
But there's like so many open models to choose from, very specific to different use cases. I think what matters is, as you've said, is the initial domain expertise over an industry.
Yeah, tsaka there's two sides to it. One is there are specific nuances per industry. And usually the default position of many, kunyari, you talk to a bank, they want to talk to a banker. So I was a banker, so that was easy. But then in my IT career naman, I got to translate that across many parang domains. The same domain but many industries. For example, you do financial analytics, everyone does finance. So you can do that, or marketing. So there's also a lot of transferable parang uses. So you have to navigate both extremes. Na, okay, if you want to tap a certain industry, you have to project your credibility there. Sometimes you just have to have a token member of your team who came from that industry so they can speak the same language. That was my role in my IT career. No, I was the token banker or the token telco guy or whatever. And then on the flip side, you won't get economies of scale unless you come up with some repeatable parang frameworks of programming, repeatable framework or abstraction that you can use to manage everything. And since I came more from the data warehouse, data engineering, I mean by experience, no, side of things. That's often where many things fail because it's easy to do the data viz and the predictive analytics. Parang sa web, that's the front end.
How do you set up the MLOps?
Oh, the backends, MLOps, ETL. That's actually where I was bred from. So, in a way, I mean, if you had 10 consultants and I was one of them, I'd be the only guy who could go that far. So we ended up retaining a lot. But then now, I don't think that's enough. Not only do you need that depth, and there are many people with that depth of expertise, I think you also need to work on kind of the PR side then. And that's what I'm learning now, the kind of the hard way when I decided to go full on in content creation, GenAI. There's a lot of other GenAI people there. And then when you look under the hood, there's nothing there. It's all ano lang, PR lang, no? And of course, you don't want to be, kasi you can also fall into the trap of, trolling and whatnot. I got trolled recently, for example. I've had many times when people attempted to do something and then baliktad sa kanila. When they open the hood, they see all these other stuff that I've done. Wala na. Atras na lang sila because, okay, this guy's more legit than we thought, no? But you have to play to your strength, I guess, and link up with other people. So now, my challenge is, when I enter a room, people automatically think, oh, this guy's an expert, he's got a lot of things, but can he really solve my problem? So it's making that connection with the customer. And now, that's why I went back to training as another, parang a beachhead, because that's also how we penetrated companies before for analytics. So I'm doing this training, parang regime. Not just it's barely making money, to be honest. It's not meant to be the profit center. But it gives me a dip on what do people really use this stuff for, or what do they really need.
That's really important for your discovery as a founder, as the lead consultant for your business. You get to understand the kinks, the pain points, the behavior, the motivations, and the buying, what do you call this? The mind space of your customer when it comes to developing capability for AI.
Yeah, and also there's this other thing. Eventually, you'll run into it if you do consulting. There's also a fear of getting married to a tech stack. There's always that. Some of them already are. They're already a Microsoft 365 customer, Azure
fan.
So then you navigate, no? But GenAI is not necessarily married to any tech stack. Everyone has their own LLM. So right now, my theory is, if you come into an entry point, vendor agnostic, and then get their needs, eventually you will be able to say, okay, since this is your problem and you guys seem to be an AWS shop, this is what we can do with your stuff. As opposed to the opposite, where you want to lock them immediately into an AWS
multi-year
framework. And that's why I like, there's this guy on the internet, his name escapes me right now, where he literally put all of these cloud stacks side by side. And they said, this is what GCP does. But if you want to do Azure, this is what you look for. And if you want to do it in AWS, this is what you look for. Wow, this is great. Because every vendor will try to, do the smoke and mirrors and say, we're the only one that does this. It's hard to say that, because a lot of it is also based on open technology din naman. So, So you will not believe the relief when I tell people, look, I'm not a vendor specific trainer, vendor agnostic. And they say, wow, okay, so we need that. Because maybe they have not really parang bought onto any particular vendor vision yet. Because I came from that background. I knew how to push a vendor. And we had
and lock it in.
And lock it in, no?
And Figure out years later.
And we had our objections na, oh, if you use ganyan, this is their problem. No, we were trained to do that. Now I'm doing the opposite na, all of this stuff, they call it FUD, diba? Fear, uncertainty, doubt. No? It's just FUD by that vendor.
But you have to focus, as a consultant, you have to focus on their problem.
Yeah.
What's their use case? What are they really trying to do?
Yeah.
And then suggest the thing that solves that specifically, right? Their constraints.
Here's another strand that I also had to learn the hard way, because there are many startup founders or trying to come up with a product. And unless you're, I would say, funded out of another country, Singapore probably, or the US, I think it's going to be very hard to do that same act in the Philippines. So consulting for me felt like a good backstop. Because, for example, when we did that NASA project, I thought that was going to be like a legit startup already, like some dengue fighting startup or something. And we got funded by UNICEF twice for that. And still, we didn't achieve product market fit. It'll always fail there because you're in a low-cost country. And who's going to buy a dengue detector system, when people are happily getting sick, or people are happy to watch people get sick? Whereas if I had done that probably in the US or some other country, it would have already become a legit health tech play already. And even then, I wouldn't even think of that becoming a unicorn. Maybe we exit that at a pretty modest valuation. So that was, I don't know if it's too late for me, but I'm already thinking that if that was the direction I wanted to do, I would have already done it years ago. But now the calling seems to be more in this, expert for hire consultancy space. Maybe that's it. Or maybe later I can probably revisit the startup game. Maybe as part of a co-founder na lang, where I bring my experience. Certainly not for this local market. Or maybe we do what the BPOs do. We get a good labor base here at reasonable costs. And then you try selling something abroad. No? I don't know. This is just food for thought now for other people out there. Might be thinking the same thing. There's a lot of heartbreak going into that. No? So you might have heard from others.
Doing startup, especially in the Philippines, is like ultra hard mode. Probably.
Because the B2C market is very stingy. Okay? Even though they need it, they won't pay for it. The B2B market, they have decent buying power. But I think relationships matter more at that market. Diba?
Very relational sales process.
So there's no middle ground where you can be more kind of meritocratic, and then just offer a good offering at a good price. Hindi rin. Parang after the first, top 500 or maybe top 250 companies, then everyone's a medium-sized company na, very, very small, and they act more like, mom and pop entrepreneurs. And if they can afford to scrimp and underpay people, they'll do that. That's really the business model here. So if you're trying to come up with a SaaS offering and you try selling it here, you might be shocked at the low adoption rate. But who knows, no? Maybe, because I think one thing that's also wrong with the Philippine market is it's mostly concentrated in Metro Manila. So maybe there is an opportunity in outside Metro Manila where the infra isn't really that developed. So they will be there'll be more openness to try out these small tools. I don't know. Maybe.
I think the key here is if you want to be a founder, coming from the Philippines, you really have to consider seeing the world as your stage, not just...
Somebody pointed that out to me. I can't remember who. Because if you attend enough of these startup events, you'll notice a difference. If you attend startup events, let's say in Singapore or the US, and then startup events here, if you go abroad, the startups are producing products that the world can use. Like Waze, Grab. Waze was started in Israel. Grab was started in Malaysia, Indonesia. But the intended ham is everyone in the world, certain segment. While in our own local startup events, people are either copying what someone did abroad and revamping it for the Philippine market, or they're just intending to tap the local market on its own. And I think that's where ultimately it will fail, because even though we do have a middle class and an upper elite market who might have buying power. The scale isn't there for your startup to survive. Or if maybe I've heard some people try this, maybe your goal is to just prove a technology and then sell out to a big company. Okay, fine. But you end up becoming an employee of the corporation. I know a lot of founders who are like that. They were acquired and now they have to serve the mandatory, call it a mandatory sentence of 2 to 3 years. You get locked in that company. So ganun din, you become an employee then. I thought you wanted to be an entrepreneur. So the middle ground is consultancy, where, you do a repeatable service, and maybe
launch a few products if you want.
Launch a few products or sell the product if you want. Parang ganun, no?
That's actually advice that I hear, I think, from possibly YC or some other founders based out of the US. That you can mix consultancy work while you are looking for product market fit and treating your startup as a side gig for now.
Yeah.
Until you reach a reasonable scale where you can focus on it full time.
Yeah. For me, I'm going to be very extreme. I think you do the consultancy while you look for PMF abroad. And of course, that has its own politics. No? Like if you want to get funded abroad, you got to look at the mixture of your management team. It can't be all, local Filipinos. It's just the way the world works. Or you become, acquired. That's why I was telling you offline, I think the startup ecosystem in the Philippines is non-existent. And it's actually the BPO sector that became the startup ecosystem. Because more and more medium-sized companies are starting to look at services abroad. So that seems to still work because you have the cost arbitrage and your bread and butter is still human labor. But then you have to think, is that going to be a sustainable business at an era where AI is automating a lot of stuff? So, but maybe as early as now, the other option is, apart from consulting, you set up a BPO. But then you have AI already plugged into it so that you're future-proofed. And you don't have to go after the huge market, the huge companies in the US. There's a fairly healthy medium-sized market in the US. And then there's also Europe, but you need language proficiency to tap that market. So I think that's where if there will be like these unicorn startups like in the next era, it might come from BPOs that service other companies. And then you see if you can scale up from there. On the flip side, I still wonder how come in a country that has horrible PISA scores and all these bad indicators from education, how come we don't have $1 billion education company that is not a school? That seems to be an unlimited source of problems. But I also know from firsthand experience, it's highly regulated. If you want to, for example, if there's this thing called continuing professional development, CPD. So every licensed professional needs to accumulate certain hours not to keep their license. So that seems like a lucrative niche. You want to go in and offer courses to accountants, to teachers, to engineers. But then the issuance of a CPD provider license so you can teach it is so political and highly regulated because nga, it's a mandatory requirement. So parang dead end din siya. Or you can go full-blown into schools. So I've seen some of the big companies, they're acquiring schools right and left. No? So maybe in the long run, that can be good also, especially if you can do it nationwide. And then I think there's a fairly good acceptance rate already of online education, mga MOOCs. Before, it was considered a no-fly zone. Pero after the pandemic, people are now come to. In fact, I get more invitations to conduct online training than face-to-face training. So that can be scalable also. But then you're going to be one out of a million probable,
it's hard to differentiate.
MOOC providers. So what makes you special? So yeah, it can't be that easy, right?
All right. I think we can ask the last question
Sure.
for you, Doc. So to all the consultants, founders, and corporates listening to you right now, what's your advice?
Be courageous. I think when I was starting out, and I said I was late, I had huge doubts that I would make it because there was always this thing about if it's such a good idea, somebody would be doing it already. And then you never start. But the reality is, even though somebody else is doing it, that's actually an opportunity for you to do a better job. And the bench for consultancies is it's quite slim. Most of them are centered around if you're not a supplier to your former employer, that's how many consultants start. You're usually in this very I would say soft space of strategy and even marketing consulting. But the space of AI and tech, very slim. There are very few providers, and that's a huge demand. And you don't have to go crazy. You just have to mint your first, I don't know, first three.
Mint.
Yeah, mint them. So you have to start hitting the market and try to get that's your product market fit, and it's unfortunately or fortunately it's still relationship based. But once you have that recurring cash flow, because it usually starts out as a one-off project and then later they'll want to retain you for a longer period. Then you now have a good base to build other stuff on. And once you're over that first hump, tuloy-tuloy na siya. I don't think it will really end. It may not be the Y Combinator, VC Series ABC type of fame unicorn outcome that you might want. But then it's also hard to try to chase that dream if you also don't have this sufficiency. And again, let's also face it, the investor ecosystem in the Philippines, I don't know, I have so many horror stories there. So it's probably better you start out as a consultant, generate your own cash flow, and then self-fund your startup. And then you do the big, the big play eventually. And that's how many of the now mature companies who have also become BPOs has started out. So that's my advice. And again, take it with a grain of salt of someone who's only been doing this for, I don't know, a little under a decade, on my own. But before that, nearly 2 decades of corporate. No? So there's room for people who have that corporate depth. Bring your experience out. And then you start rubbing elbows with the people of the opposite naman. They've started out as a startup, but not much depth there. I think there's ways to collaborate with others.
All right, it's great having you on Fractional, Doc.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Alexis.
much.
And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that.